Reddit, what is the most disturbing, unexplainable thing that has ever happened to you or someone you know? Serious. This one isn't super exciting. Just weird. My grandma was always irrationally afraid of dogs. She liked them, but they made her nervous because they were too messy and loud and unpredictable. She would always tell us not to leave the door open on nice days. Close that door. A big black dog might walk in. She had this fear that one day she'd turn around and there'd be a big black Labrador slobbering on her floors. We always laughed at her oddly specific fear. And we knew everyone who lived nearby and their dogs. The biggest, blackest dog within 1 mile of her house was a Yorkie, so her fear was unfounded. Anyway, years later my grandma passed away. My dad and I had the sad task of clearing out her house. Things were a bit stuffy, so we left the door open to the yard and got to work. After a while we both hear a strange noise and look up. It sounded like panting. We turned around and, I shit you not, there was a big, black Labrador sitting in the middle of the kitchen. Just gazing up at us happily, drooling on Grandma's linoleum. Just like she always said would happen. We lost our shit. Uncontrollable laughter, crying just a little. Gave the dog scritches and escorted him back outside. My dad shut the door, looked upwards and said, "Sorry Ma. You were right." A few years ago, my uncle woke up at around 2 in the morning because of the ringing of a telephone beside his bed. He picked it up, and it was his friend. His friend was asking how my uncle was and such. After a brief conversation, his friend said that he was peaceful where he is, things felt great, and that he's happy. My uncle was glad to hear that and said goodbye. As he put down the telephone, my uncle woke up and realized that he was dreaming. The next day, he heard news about his friend being killed by an intruder in his house at around 1 a.m. Was in a hotel last week and was woken up at about 2:30 a.m. to the most horrific, terrifying screams of a woman outside of my door somewhere close. Sounded like this person was about to die and knew it. There were probably 5 loud screams, and then silence. I woke me up and by the time I turned on the light and got to the door it stopped and there was complete silence. My immediate thought was to run outside and figure out who needed help and what I could do, but I stopped because it dawned on me it could be a trap. I called the hotel and they said a few people called it in but they didn't find anything unusual in the area. Weirdest thing that's ever happened to me in a hotel. Hoping it was just a bad prank or someone hallucinating or something. When I was in elementary, I went to school ridiculously early for swim practice. Turns out it was cancelled and I only found out when I got there. That meant that I had the whole school to myself. I waited near the school gate and soon enough my homeroom teacher arrived. I greeted her, saying "Hi Miss Grace." Here's where it gets weird. She ignored me and walked past me. Confused, I looked toward the gate, then back at where she was walking. Except, she wasn't there. I was a bit frightened at this point so I went to wait outside my locked classroom, which happens to be next to the restrooms. I sat down on the floor. A few minutes later, I heard the eeriest, creepiest laugh coming from the restroom. It was really high-pitched, almost witch-like. It made my hairs stand on end. I was so scared I ran back toward the school gate. A few minutes later, my homeroom teacher, the one I had just seen earlier who ignored me and then vanished into thin air, passed through the gate. She saw me and greeted me. I was too freaked out to reply. Until now, I have no idea what on earth happened. It's the only paranormal experience I haven't been able to explain to this day. When I was around 13, I was in my room getting dressed. I leaned over and felt a splat on my back. Put my hand there and it comes back covered in blood. I'm disturbed. I can't find any sort of source, but I clean it off and continue to clothe myself. Next time I lean over I feel it again. I now freak out and search my ceiling and anything that might have had a red substance on or around it. Room is spotless. I told myself it wasn't blood and instead was some art material, but it quickly browned as blood does. Haunts me to this day. I was hanging out at a friend's house in their basement with my friend, his girlfriend and mine. We were all playing and rebounds per game. It was the middle of the day. We hear the door open upstairs, footsteps on the floor, hear the cellar door open and my friend's dad call downstairs, "Pete, you home?" My friend answers affirmatively and then we hear, "Come upstairs a minute, I need your help." We all head upstairs. There is no one there. No car in the driveway, no one in the house at all but the four of us. All four of us heard the same thing. My friend's dad found the story funny, but unbelievable when he eventually came home later that day. My parents moved into a house not too long ago which in decorative terms, drastically required bringing forwards from the 1970s. They brought some builders in and set about it, however have told me that upon restoring the place, a few odd things happened that in addition to making them uneasy, nearly drove the workmen from completing their job. The initial happenings came in the form of random knocking and banging that you can sort of explain away. However, one day they heard a crashing sound like a wall had given way in the house. They ran from their bedroom to check it out, but could find no explanation. A further occurrence was claimed whilst my parents were out and the workmen were at their jobs. They said that they had heard a large bang from the bathroom and upon running to see what had gone wrong, their radiator had been torn from the wall and where it lay on the floor, a couple of wooden cabinet units had been piled on top of it. What made this even stranger was that when they investigated, 2 footprints were found in the dust that had settled from the ongoing work. Weirder still was that they were bare footprints and both of the left foot, even though they were right next to each other. When my parents got home, the workmen were talking to them and threatening to leave without finishing the job. Whilst they were talking, both they and my parents claimed they could hear a faint singing sound without words. They did eventually persuade the workmen to persist, although I assume they must have heard some shit to threaten walking from a big job in the first place. I live in the Netherlands in a small city. Once I was walking home drunk from a friend's house. Not a long walk, 15 minutes maybe. So I go through an outside mall, which of course was closed at night, and this guy was the two walking in the same direction. I think nothing of it. He keeps walking in the same direction, fine whatever, there are only so many directions. I get out of the mall area, go up these huge stairs and notice he is behind me and still walking in the same direction. I pick up my pace and luckily there was another person passing too for a couple of seconds. So I finally get to my flat, all the while I was looking behind me. I go to the first floor where I live and I stop midway on the way to my door and look behind, and I wait a couple of seconds. Sure enough, the door that leads to the floor gallery opens and I see a head look around the corner. He sees me looking at him and books it. I didn't bother following but did stay outside to see him leave downstairs around a corner. I have no idea who that was, I'm just a Middle Eastern dude, nothing special, I have no enemies that I know of. I fully believe my old townhouse was haunted. Be prepared for a read. I first noticed things when I was in the living room and I heard somebody run across my upstairs stomping as they went along. I freaked and checked and there was nobody. Then whenever I was in my bedroom and the door was open I could see strange shadows in the hallway that shouldn't have been there. I started losing it when I was laying in bed with my head next to the wall and I heard someone knock on the other side. Problem was my bedroom was on the 2nd story so there's no possible way that could have happened. Immediately after that I went to take a shower and when I took off my shirt there were long scratches along my chest which terrified me. Me and my brother were terrorized by whatever this was for months, to the point where we both slept in my bedroom because being in a room by ourselves at night was too scary. The last day this entity was noticed, at least by me, was strange. I was upstairs playing video games when I heard a girl crying extremely loud, like it was in the house. I was home alone though, so I had a feeling it was the ghost. I go downstairs and follow the noise, which lead me to my kitchen. As soon as I entered my kitchen, the crying stopped. I was confused but thought whatever, so I turned around and it was right there. It looked funny, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, but it was as dark as the void. Like somebody took a picture of where I was looking, and used paint or something and drew a completely black figure, then put it in my eyes. Strangest stuff I've ever experienced. My friend Ricky told me this story a few years ago. Rick is a very serious guy, conservative, mid-30s. He's not particularly religious, doesn't drink or do drugs, and he doesn't believe in anything supernatural. He's into hunting, fishing, eating deer and wild animals, and that's about it. He's not the type to tell tall tales. That's why I believe him when he told me this. When Rick was 24, he was in the bathroom when he heard someone walking around his house. It was his brother, Mikey. Rick is really surprised to see him because his brother is at college across the country. I just want to tell you everything is cool, man. I'm fine. Mikey says. Rick is like, WTF is going? What happened? Mikey says, I gotta go now, sorry, don't have time to stay. Love ya, and walks out the front door. Rick is confused and cannot speak. He said it felt like he was frozen, actually got shivers and could barely speak the entire time. He tried to follow him out the door. Mikey is gone. There's no sign of him, no car engines driving away, nothing. Rick immediately calls him. This was the early 00s days before everyone had phones. No answer. Rick calls his mom. She answers and he tells her that Mikey just showed up at his place acting weird. She has no idea. Both of them try to contact Mikey for the rest of the day, to no avail. Rick drives around the neighborhood looking for him. About an hour later, Mom calls Rick. Mikey died in a car accident late the night before. The car wasn't found until morning. It was in a field way off the road till morning. I went hiking in the woods when I was still living in the US. We were renting a small house next to some hiking trails. The trails were well kept and the woods pretty massive. Anyway, at that time I was working on my PhD thesis and feeling pretty depressed. I had just experienced a terrible panic attack and decided a walk in the woods would help. So I took off and was feeling relaxed. The air smelled like wet grass after a rain shower, the sun was out, I could hear birds and crickets, etc. It was nice. Now there was a big main trail which would branch off into smaller trails. I always took the same smaller trail since I knew it well and was sure not to get lost. So, I made my way from the main trail to the small trail. As I kept hiking, the smaller trail would branch out again and you could go either left or right. As I neared the fork in the trail, I saw a figure standing right in the middle of the fork with his back to me. He didn't turn around and he didn't move except to sway side to side. He was wearing a brown jacket and a brown hat. I kept moving forward a little bit thinking he would hear my footsteps on the leaves/gravel/grass and turn around, but he didn't. I stood there and watched him, his arms straight by his side, swaying back and forth, and decided to book it. Something just felt wrong, you know? I started running and looked back thinking he might have heard my running and turned around, but nope. Same position. Went back a few days later and I was the only one on the trails. I probably could have just said something and asked what he was doing. But I'm a petite 20-something female and something about the situation made me feel uneasy. This one just fucked me up. When I was 9, my grandmother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. My dad wanted me to spend some time with her before she passed, so my parents sent me abroad to spend that whole summer with her. You would never have even known she was sick. We were having fun and enjoying life. She never even mentioned not feeling well. Not once. We had a blast, and to this day, that was my best summer ever. End of August I have to go back home because school is starting, so I get my stuff packed, say bye to my grandma, telling her I love her, and leave. When I arrived home, I called her and told HDR I made it back home okay and that I love her. We talked for a bit and then hung up. A few hours later the phone rings. It's my grandfather telling my dad that my grandmother has fallen into a coma. My dad leaves on the next flight. A few nights later, I wake up in the middle of the night and start laughing. I felt happy. I smelled my grandmother. Her scent was everywhere. Whatever I smelled, it was her scent. I was just smelling everything and laughing when my mum heard me and came into the room. I was smelling the clothes in my closet and said, "It's Grandma. Can't you smell her?" My mother went white as ghost. Just then the phone rang. My dad called to tell us that my grandma passed away. I don't know. I have always believed that she came to say bye. One time when at age 11 I was trying to open an orange and I couldn't, and I went to my mom to open it. I hear fast typing on the mechanical keyboard that our family desktop had, so I walk to where the computer and my mom isn't. The WTF. I look around the house and after looking put the window I remember that she has been out running errands. Strange. So later that day I'm walking up the stairs of my house and I hear the typing again, but it cuts out when I walk towards the room with the computer again. Mum isn't there typing. For reference, my dad types at a speed of 1 character per 20 seconds, the Hunt and Peck method, so it could have only been my mum. And until we got rid of that computer and keyboard I would occasionally hear typing on it. Also at night every now and then the floorboards creak and pop as if someone's walking on it, even though there's no one up and walking.